Hey everyone, this is Charlie, and I'm here to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. When I was thinking about how to summarize All Quiet on the Western Front, one scene from a different movie came to mind, Saving Private Ryan. It is the hardest to watch scene from a war movie I had ever watched up until probably All Quiet on the Western Front. And if you're like me, you know exactly what scene I'm referring to, because that scene's stuck in my mind since I was a kid. If you have seen it and want to watch it again, because you're a sicko, or if you haven't seen it, I'm going to play it here. Fair warning, it's violent.
Jam! You got any 30 cal? I'm out! Up 'em!
Hör auf! Du hast keine Chance. Lass es uns beenden. Listen to me! Listen to me! Stop! Stop! Es ist einfacher für dich. Viel einfacher. Du wirst sehen, es ist gleich vorbei.
Not easy to watch. And that's true about All Quiet on the Western Front, because All Quiet on the Western Front is like you take the brutality of that scene and you extend it into an entire movie. Now, I consider that both a warning and a recommendation. It's a warning because that is violent and brutal as all hell. If you aren't ready to watch a movie like that, skip this one. There's no reason you should keep watching this video. It is not the movie for you. However, likening All Quiet on the Western Front to that scene from Saving Private Ryan is also a strong recommendation in my book because that scene stuck with me. I said it was something I took with me from childhood. Well, it's one of the first things I think about when I think of war because there's just this brutal violence. You can see this kind of recognition of each other's humanity in that scene at the same exact moment that a knife is being plunged into someone's heart. There's something so raw, so visceral, so awful about war captured by that scene. And All Quiet on the Western Front captures it again and again over the course of an entire movie. And it's hard to take your eyes off of. I think it teaches you some things that are important to learn or at least be reminded of. It's a great movie. I have no reservations about recommending it. I think it's really good. I think it's really worth watching, but I won't tell you it's going to be easy. Let's get into it. Oh, and just a heads up, spoilers ahead. One of the things I liked about this movie is how succinct it is at capturing what it means to show you. So, for example, the movie opens with the main character, Paul, and his friends being enlisted in the army and going off to war. This process does not take long in screen time, just a few minutes, really. But it shows you just how exciting and romantic their view of war is and how easy it would be to be romantic like that when you're 17, you're with your buddies, and you're a young man in 1917 era Germany. So here I think a little historical perspective is important. And I will caveat, I'm not a historian in the slightest, but I do think what I'm about to say is not especially controversial and really important for understanding what this movie, what this historical event is about. So if you're a young person in 1917, you're in a specific culture, which is Germany. Germany is the heir of Prussia. There are two important things to know about Prussia for our purposes. First, it was a highly militaristically influenced society. So the virtues of discipline and obedience were quite important to the culture that Germany emerged from. But also, you're living in a country that hasn't fought a major war in about 50 years. So in the 19th century, every generation or so would have some kind of war to participate in. And so these military virtues could be exercised by actual service and glory and victory on the battlefield. But it had been 50 years since that. And so the dominant reigning generation of German officials were people who believed in militaristic virtues, but did not have firsthand experience of combat by and large. And so they were especially prone to romanticizing the glorious, heroic, cool parts of war and not being aware of the reality of the violence, of the hellacious nature of it. They were especially unaware, not just because of their particular generational ignorance, but also because nobody realized, not at the beginning of World War I, that they had entered the 20th century and warfare was going to be different. And so there are these famous stories of troops going off into combat, and they're going off in military parades with the full uniforms and cavalry and, even carriages, which is how war used to be fought, that kind of, noble tradition from the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries. They didn't really realize at the beginning of this war that the 20th century would not present the same type of warfare. And so these kids are being exposed to this narrative of war that is very different than what they in fact signed up for. We're now in a trench warfare machine gun era, chemical weapons with artillery and air forces and tanks and all these things that take war from what used to be not peaceful, not even necessarily civilized, but not the same type of high intensity carnage. The movie, I think, depicts this quickly, but really well, because these kids are excited. And they're excited in part because of the speeches of older men who are telling them that this is their opportunity to win glory for their country and for themselves. And then they get to the front, and within about 7 minutes, they realize that's not what this is going to be. The movie does a really good job of showing this experience of these kids, these high school juniors, going from rah, let's go get them, and then it dawning upon them really quickly that they are not in Kansas anymore. They are not where they had signed up to be. They meet a triage station full of screaming and dying men in agony. And then they face artillery fire, which is this random pockets of dirt flying into the air. And if one of them hits close, it means you're dead or maimed. And then they get to the trenches, the infamous trenches. They then face fire, and they get separated from one another, and some of them die, and it's just so quickly, so awful. I mean, this movie is so good at making it look so awful. It's not just a movie about how war is generally awful. It's about the specific ways in which it is awful. So, for example, one of Paul's friends, one of the side characters we meet, again, spoiler, is this sweet kid with glasses. And so you can kind of predict what will happen because of his glasses, but it shows that sometimes you get soldiers brought to the front who are just not psychologically capable of the type of panic, fear, chaos, and somehow operating despite those conditions. And so you see this person who just has no chance from the beginning. And I think that's real. I think that especially in circumstances like World War I, where there wasn't a lot of time to figure out, are you ready, or are you adequately trained, or are you the right person for this job? I say not enough time, but also not enough interest. I mean, this was about enlisting men and getting them to the front. People like that would be faced with these circumstances that they just were not even close to capable of operating in. But then there are other people like Paul who do learn to manage their circumstances, but they learn to do it through this type of frenzied, animalistic urgency. And there's these scenes where you can see Paul steeling himself for battle, but he doesn't do it in the way that I think I had been accustomed to seeing, where they focus and become courageous and strong. He becomes like a chimpanzee. Like he's ready to just run and shoot and kill and just tap into this type of primalcy that I don't think many movies have ever captured quite so well. And then the violence that flows from that, just pandemonium. And learning just to be a person in those circumstances and survive them takes a kind of insanity, a break from the type of reality and cognition that you and I ever live in. And this movie is so good at showing that. It doesn't depict battle as just a thing that happens after lunch, after rations, or after, walking in the field for a while. I think in World War I, in the circumstances that this movie is depicting, it really convincingly shows a battlefield where you have to be ready to enter hell. And man, oh man, do they enter hell. I mean, there is the old saying, war is hell. It's one of those sayings that I think it's really easy to become numb to because you've heard it a million times, and what does it really mean? And then you are reminded of what that simple little saying really stands for. Something that is a deep truth. War, maybe not always, but sometimes, is absolute hell. And this movie is so damn good at showing it. I think one of the criticisms that could be leveled against this movie is that it's pacifistic, right? It's about showing how bad war is. And you could say, well, it's not nuanced or subtle about the message it's delivering. And that's true. It's not really trying to show you, hey, here are the cool parts of war. Here's the camaraderie that makes it all worthwhile, like Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. Here's the noble purpose. We get where, like Saving Private Ryan, they come across the concentration camps and you see, well, this was a war worth fighting. It doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you those out. It doesn't flinch from the message, which is this shit is awful. And the way the movie goes, the way characters are going to die, and the way the movie's going to finish, which if you've read the book, and if you haven't, you'll see. Nothing about it is silver lining-y. Nothing about it is supposed to be multifaceted about how maybe war is actually good. It's delivering a message, but the message is true. The message is important, and it's one that you see more vividly in this movie than any movie I've ever seen, any story that I've ever read, really. I think the other thing you could criticize the movie for is a lack of kind of narrative cohesion. There isn't much in the way of a plot. It's kind of just a one damn thing after another type of story. But again, I think that's what war often is. I think that's kind of monotony broken up with chaos. And World War I was heavy on the chaos and light on the monotony, it seems. So I think a soldier's experience would often not look like a cohesive narrative arc. So no, when you watch this movie, you're not going to get, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 type of stuff. You're going to get kind of this deluge of chaos, violence, pandemonium, brutality. And so is that going to be easy to watch? No. Are you going to learn to love the characters? Maybe not. I think it's really well acted and there's good dialogue and there's some little scenes where, you get to know these characters a little bit and you do care for them a lot, especially because they're portrayed very humanly and convincingly. But again, this movie is just not really built to be a Hollywood story or a tight narrative. It's about kind of, I think, what war really looks like. So there are things about this movie that make it not the best story, but it achieves, I think, exactly what it sets out to achieve. Another thing I think the movie does a really good job of capturing is we do get a few cutaways to the scene from the high command. So you get to see the commanders, and then you also get to see these treaty negotiations at the front. The treaty negotiations, I think, are good. They're good enough. I didn't think they were especially insightful, but they show, I think, kind of the French attitude, which is we're not going to give an inch. And if you know the next phase of German history, this leads to kind of the weakness of Weimar Germany and the poverty and hyperinflation that gives rise to radicalism in Weimar Germany, the collapse of the center, rise of the left, the right wins, that's Hitler, and then you get the next World War. But what I really liked was the portrayal of the frontline commander, who is, I talked earlier about that lost generation of Prussians who never had gotten the experience on the battlefield. Well, this guy is portrayed so vividly and so, it felt so true to me, this vision of, I guess you'd call it hyper masculine, but this belief that man is an island. He's not meant to feel happiness or joy. He's meant to toil and suffer and win glory. And all that really matters is his manhood and his pride. And the consequence of that is a man who is so hell-bent on war that this scene, I just had this thought when I was watching it of just, if you're talking to this guy, you have to kill him. You have to get rid of this person because this is a type of very rational insanity, an insanity that will specifically lead to, when in the hands of a man with power, the worst violence. And that's what the movie ends up showing. I thought the main thing the movie did was capture the brutality of war. I thought the second thing it did was capture a certain type of perspective that I think brought the nations of Europe into World War I, kept them there, losing millions of men, and what that perspective really looked like, how people could have ended up there, and how damaging and disastrous it is. Another thing I really like, and admittedly this is going to kind of undercut the whole theory of the review I've offered so far, is it looks sick as hell. It's really cool. I mean, there are some scenes that are just like, whoa, one of the things that draws our attention to war over and over again, there's been so many movies made about war, stories written about war, is the stakes, the raw action, just seeing things go bang and explode. This movie does execute there. It does have that kind of visual candy that keeps your eyes glued and a part of you maybe going like, fuck yeah. I was going a little bit of fuck yeah. In between the times where I was like, oh no, that is the worst thing. Finally, I think it's important to note that this is a movie made by Germans. It's a German director. As far as I know, all the actors are German or maybe Austrian, but I would imagine they're all native German speakers, certainly how it read. And getting this perspective of the German experience of war, I think is really useful. I think it's really hard to do with World War II. I think it's really hard to humanize Nazis like that. I don't think we're ever likely to. And, you know, as someone who's half Jewish and just as someone who doesn't like Nazis, like most of us, it would be hard and kind of off-putting to see, although maybe interesting too, but probably not going to happen with World War II. World War I think we still tend to think of Germany as the bad guys since we came in on the other side, but it doesn't have those kind of stakes. And so you get to have the perspective of another culture, another people, and just get to see the kind of connection through that. So I think that that's another valuable aspect of this movie. It's going to be in subtitles, so if you're allergic to subtitles, tough luck, this is not for you. But I think that this is another value out of the movie. It shows a foreign people in a way that makes them feel not foreign. And that always is valuable, I think. All in all, I really like this movie. I'm tempted to say it's one of the best war movies ever made. I don't think I can go that far because it doesn't have enough narrative structure and character development, but it does show you something that I think is one of those things that you need to be reminded of viscerally. War is awful. This type of violence is awful. It's agony. I keep using the same words because they're the synonyms for bad that are the strongest that I have in my vocabulary. I know it's a simple point, but it's a really deeply true one. This movie captures that better than any I had ever seen before. It's one of the most emotionally exhausting movies I've seen in a while. I think for plenty of people, it's not the right movie for them, but if it is the movie for you, and I think you probably know yourself well enough to say, I can handle this much violence or I can't. If you can, it's really worth watching. It's really good. So I hope you check it out. And I also hope you check out my other reviews. And like I've said in my past videos, I'm new to this. I'm figuring stuff out. For example, I know it's dark right now and the review began when it was light out and I probably changed, I'm figuring stuff out. So if you have any kind of feedback for me, suggestions, I always welcome hearing that. It does mean a lot if you give me a like and subscribe. You know, there's not many likes or subscribes on these videos right now. So it makes a big difference when you do that. Really appreciate you spending the time here with me and I hope you'll stop by again soon.